So I hope that you all have in your possession a piece of paper that begins with the life and times of Father Abraham. And it is a, as you all know, if you read in any way, or if you started to read the suggested lessons in the Bulletin Sunday, you know that Abraham takes up a lot of space in the Bible. He's pretty important. And there's a lot that can be said and discussed about Abraham. We don't have time to do all of it tonight. What we will do is go forward in Abraham's life and then maybe go backwards next week, because I think Abraham must have a couple of weeks because of so much. So tonight we're going to talk primarily about Abraham and Hagar and Sarai and Ishmael and the genesis of the trouble that has existed for thousands of years in the Middle East. Next week, I hope that we'll be able to look at the circumcision, which sounds like a horrible thing to talk about, but it is something that has a relationship to our baptism. And we're going to talk about the sacrifice of Isaac next week, and also hopefully the meeting with Melchizedek. And those are very important, three very important things. But tonight we're going to look at. So I gave you all this business about Abraham here so you can begin to get acquainted with it, and particularly this business about covenants and things like that. But tonight I want you to turn over to, I gave you all you don't have to look on with this if you have your Bibles, but I printed off to you the two pertinent chapters, 16 and 21 of Genesis, and I put them both in there for you. And so I want to read this, and then we'll just jump right into it, because there's no need to even try to start explaining the troubles without going into this reading. Genesis 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, remember, their names haven't been changed yet. Names signify something. We'll talk about that next week. And they signify something even more when you're in a relationship with the Lord. So listen. Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Now, I'm going to cut this off because somebody's sending me text messages. I want you to notice something right off the bat here. Moses, in describing and setting this story forth, says, now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So Moses is kind enough to call the woman by name. Notice there's already a rift. Sarai doesn't call her by name. She is merely my slave. Her resentment and her belittling of Hagar has already begun in this really stupid idea that she has. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So Abraham, I just find that funny. I mean, Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, I know.
She twisted.
He didn't put up much of a fight. I mean, there's some stuff, Isaac means, he laughed, but I mean, we could all be named Isaac at this. I mean, there's just some funny stuff in the Bible if you read it and really think about that. Abram agreed. Like, oh yeah, I'll go get some milk at the grocery store. That's what I'm talking about. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. Now, what is interesting is how some versions of the Bible refer to her. Many versions of the Bible refer to Hagar as a concubine. Does anybody have a version of the Bible that says concubine if you're looking at it? You don't have to look it up right now. But the word is not concubine. And I don't know why there are translation differences in English, because this is not the word for concubine. The version that I'm reading to you is the literally correct version. This is the English Standard Version that I think this is the NIV that I'm reading to you.
That's in my NIV.
Yeah, this is the NIV that I'm reading out of right now. And it says wife. It's an accurate translation. So let's go back for a minute and let's just set the table, because I want you to see how this problem that has not stopped was created from the beginning. So first, Sarah has this dumb idea. And why do I keep saying it's a dumb idea? Because remember, I know you all are probably familiar with the story that came before this, and so we won't have to go back and backtrack it. But God promised Sarah that he would give her a child. Now here's the first problem with sin. And probably everybody in this room, maybe. I know I have. I better not speak for everybody else, but I'm pretty sure probably everybody in this room has done this. We have grown impatient with God because God doesn't work on our timetables, and we decide to speed it up by taking matters into our own hands. That right there will get you in trouble every time. It's the best analogy I can use is that's a harmless analogy and not even on the kind of scale, but anybody who's ever tried to put a Chinese Christmas bicycle together knows what I'm talking about, because the instructions are all there, and you know, and I know, and everybody else knows that all you have to do is Google it, and you can get it in English. But by this time, you're too frustrated, and you're impatient. And you say, you know what? I'm not going to Google this thing. I'm going to put this sucker together. I know what a bicycle looks like. Well, by the time you're done, you have a steering wheel where the back, handlebars where the back wheel should be, and you have a back wheel on top of the front wheel, and you have about 24 bolts left over. And you just like, well, the elves made something new. That's all I can. You got the first one. But we mess up when we take matters in our own hands and don't follow the process, don't follow the directions, don't follow the instructions. So the problem right there was just kicked off when Sarai decided to take matters in her own hand. Now, again, if you go back and remember the story of Adam and Eve, Adam was present. Remember, we talked about that. Adam was present when Eve and the devil were having their conversation. And he was present when she decided to eat. And he didn't do anything to stop her. And so already that overturned God's plan for what the marriage relationship was supposed to be. If you look at Sarah and Abraham right now, the exact same thing is happening. Sarah takes the lead in disobedience, and Abraham doesn't raise one finger to stop it. Like Adam and the fruit, Abraham is going to sample the forbidden fruit of adultery. Why not? My wife said it was okay. So, she's not, and to compound this, she's not a concubine. Now, I don't know why that makes any difference. But apparently there was some smidgen of difference. But to be a wife, Sarah's not just saying, here is a play toy. Sarah's saying, here is a wife for you. Take her as your wife. Once again, this further upends God's ideal for marriage. Go back to Genesis. One man, one woman. 2 make the marriage, not 3. So there's a problem. Verse 4. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, the she there being Sarah, being Hagar, she began to despise her mistress. So now there's a feeling of resentment. There's a feeling of a disordered relationship. Sarah's a slave. Hagar's a slave to Sarah. But both of them are equally Abraham's wives. So she's resentful now. Why should this woman be in charge of me? I'm carrying the baby. So resentment just continues to build. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I could make 1,000 jokes about being married, but I will refrain from that. But isn't it interesting, going back to Adam and Eve, when they were guilty, when they realized what happened, what did they do? Eve said, the devil made me do it. And Adam said, the woman that you gave me did this. Sarah said, you're responsible for this wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave, still doesn't call her by name. Still there's that indignity and that disrespect. In your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. Well, I mean, this is just so explanatory to me. It's like, what did you expect? But here's an issue. Sin always has consequences. There's all sorts of stuff going on here on the emotional level. There's guilt, there's shame, there's anger, there's jealousy, there is, resentment, there's pride, jealousy. Maybe I said that already. But there's all sorts of things going on here between these two women. And I don't want to say poor Abraham is caught in the middle, because there's no innocent party here, obviously, particularly not, one of the participants. But you got to imagine Abraham saying, Lord, what did I get myself into? But he is, and this is what my granddaddy always told me, it is a whole lot easier to get into trouble than it is to get out of trouble. And when it comes to adultery, I'm not sure that there's any getting out of it without lasting damage. It will never be the same. The damage is done and something is forever broken. And that's sad, but, and not to say that adultery is worse than anything else, but this is what we're dealing with right here. But sin, on the grand scale, sin has consequences. Everything we do has consequences. We don't need to go down that road any further. Verse 6, your slave is in your hands. Now Abraham is making her, Hagar, a non-entity, a subhuman. He's not even referring to her by name. Your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best. Now, isn't this an interesting thing about Abraham? And I love to point this out because the Bible does not hide the sins and the flaws of the people that we are simultaneously instructed to hold up as heroes of the faith. Abraham, listen, we don't call him Father Abraham for nothing. He is not the patriarch for nothing. And yet, he is a liar. He is an adulterer. He now is, do with her whatever you want to. She's your slave. Wait a minute. 1, 2 verses earlier, she's your wife, Abraham. No. I've annulled it. It doesn't count. So we got, here's this. There's some theory about, Abraham is just, once again, going along with whatever Sarah wants because, if she's happy, I'm happy, kind of thing. And I don't want any more trouble. Well, you dug a pretty deep hole here. Then Sarah mistreated Hagar. And she fled. That is a sad statement. But before Ishmael is born, you can begin to see that the two mothers didn't like each other, and so the two children would naturally not like each other. By the way, in Hebrew, when it says that she mistreated her, the word in Hebrew actually means tormented her. There's a difference between mistreatment and torment. So she was not nice at all. This is not just a one-off. This is she was tormenting. And I'll give you an example. In Exodus, when it says that the Egyptians mistreated the Hebrew slaves, the word is the same thing. tormented. So you have whatever is in mind with how a slave would have been tormented by their master is what we're supposed to understand from here. So it loses a little bit in English. Loses a lot, in fact, in English. But these are heroes of the faith and yet still sinful. So let's talk about this, compounding. Everybody has sinned here. Sarah suggests an affair. Hagar agrees to an affair. She's got ulterior motives. Abraham's probably saying, who do I need to pay so I can, be involved in this or whatever. And so, he's just an idiot in this whole thing. So they're all guilty because he's the one who fathers the child. But then, to compound it, Hagar gets jealous. Abraham denies this woman entirely and says, do with her what you want. Sarah makes it worse in sin by tormenting this woman. And then again, Abraham stands by and does nothing. Not only gave her permission, but then to do what she wanted to, but then when he saw her doing what she was doing, he did nothing. Now, let's take a look at Nazi Germany for a minute. It's one thing to say that the German people in 1933 were unaware of the monster they elected chancellor in Hitler. It's another thing entirely to say that they were not complicit by not rising up against Hitler when they saw what he was doing, when they knew what he was doing. They were not without blood on their own hands when they saw gypsies and Poles and Jews and everybody else just be exterminated, the mentally handicapped and all sorts of other people. They were complicit. Abraham is likewise complicit here. So we move on to, let's see. So the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road of Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, said Sarah, from my mistress Sarai, she answered. The angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. So we have an interesting thing that's going on here. We have an angel who has come and is making a promise, because an angel is a messenger of God, making a promise on behalf of God. He says, go back to your mistress, submit to her, but listen, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. So there is a promise made of another great nation. Then the angel said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. Ishmael means the Lord hears. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility towards all his brothers. Now, it's just an interesting thing to hear this particular passage. He will be a wild donkey of a man. I used to always love it because I grew up when it was only King James used, and King James says he will be a wild ass of a man. And every teenage boy in the church thought that was hilarious. And it's interesting that what this means, of course, is it's a prophecy of Ishmael and his progeny, all those who followed descend from him. To be called a wild ass or a wild donkey of a man literally means to be stubborn and to be independent. It means that you will be unreasonable. I mean, I don't know how many of you have experiences with donkeys, but wild ones are even worse than the farm ones. We had one, but that donkey we had was like a dog. It followed you around all the time. But the Department of Interior, for instance, has a raffle every year, and you can apply to be given a wild burro from the Southwest because they cull them because there's just too many of them running wild out there. And all you have to do is go to Texas. That's where they corral them. You go to Texas and you pick it up and you bring it home and it's your donkey. I always thought I wanted one until I heard all the horror stories about those things. They will kick dents in the trailers and everything, and you know, until you get home, and then you can't do anything with them. But listen how the Bible describes Ishmael and his descendants. He will be unreasonable. He will be untamable. He will be stubborn. He will be independent. He will not be submissive to anyone else. Think about that. And in relation to where we're going. Now, obviously, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but the descendants of Ishmael are the Arab people. The Arab people, the prophet Muhammad was an Arab. He was an Ishmaelite. And of course, he is the founder of I'll say more about this in a bit, but he was the founder of Islam. And from there we go. Now listen, I want to read you, I want to tell you a bit about how the Quran translates this. So the Quran in Arabic, to be called a wild ass is a compliment, because they have somehow determined that the wild donkey is superior to every other animal. See now you see the issue with progressive Christianity. All you have to do is just change one word, the definition of one word, and you're off the track already. Because you can go in a completely different direction with the redefinition of one word. Another Arabic version is even worse. It defines donkey, wild donkey, as being one who is devoted and righteous to his God and his Father. So now if you're a Muslim and you're reading your holy book, the Quran, and you see that he will be a wild ass, which everybody else thinks of as derogatory and punitive, they think is complimentary and a touch, an indication of superiority, because it means superior to everybody else, totally devoted and righteous towards God and their fathers. Puts a different spin. Not only that, they add to it that it could also possibly mean he will be fruitful. So the Arabic rendition of this passage is this. Let me read it to you. And he shall be a faithful and fruitful man above men. Now, follow along in your verse while I read this to you, because I want you to see what's changed. He shall be a faithful and fruitful man above men, yet his hand will be with every man, and every man's hand with him. He shall dwell in the face, meaning having the admiration of all his brethren. That ain't what the Bible says, is it? Yeah. So,
Mike, quick question.
Yeah.
So, I know that we don't have the answer to this, but it seems like this is a Christophany moment where the angel of the Lord has come instead of an angel of the Lord. And he said that Ishmael will be a wild donkey of a man.
mm-hmm.
So if this is a Christophany, that's Jesus pre-incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back to John 14, Jesus found a young donkey. In another Gospels, it's an unbridled or an unbroken donkey,
Mm-hmm.
a wild donkey, and sat on it and brought it into Jerusalem. I just kind of see a link there that perhaps he has tamed the descendants of Ishmael, even if it's only symbolically.
That's a good point. And if you have time, I'll get to it.
No, just
Because it does play into this. There is Gary Smith. Hey, man. So, go to 21. Chapter 21. I printed that out. Now, the Lord was gracious to Sarah. Names have changed by now. We'll have to get to that later. As he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. She was just impatient. Sarah became pregnant, bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very same time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him when his son Isaac was 8 days old. Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Hang on to that circumcision business. We'll probably briefly come back to it. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone here who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham and Sarah that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Yitzhak, Isaac, means to laugh, or laughter. Even today in modern Hebrew, even though Jews all over the world name their children Yitzhak, or Isaac, it means laughter. Prior to this, there was no child named Isaac. This is a unique name. Verse 8, the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Now, the NIV kind of did me wrong because it doesn't have what most earlier versions of the Bible had. Most of the earlier versions of the Bible had, she saw her son, let's go back to it, and she saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham was playing with Isaac. And she then immediately went to Abraham and said, get rid of this woman and her son. And that confused a lot of people, because why would she get mad if they were just playing? So linguists began to look, and they came up with a possibility that the word that's used there meant to mock. And so some of the later editions of the Bible will say mock. However, a closer look at the linguistics, the word is mitzachek, mitzachek in Hebrew, and in Southern English there is a similarity, a connection, because if you said you caught two kids playing with each other, you can take that one of two ways. You can take it in a completely harmless playing kickball, or take it in an entirely different sexual direction. There's indication in the Bible that leads us to believe, and it makes sense. It makes sense in context. It makes sense in Sarah's reaction. It makes sense in every sense of the word, in the animosity that continued to grow. Because over in Exodus chapter 32, there is this scene described when the Israelites are dancing around the golden calf. And the word is the same word. And the literal rendering is they are whipped into a sexual frenzy. Same word. So, Ishmael at this point is about 16 years old. Isaac would be 2. That's the weaning age. So, there's only 2 possible ways to understand this, in context and in any other sense of reality that makes sense. And that is either that Ishmael was bullying, doing harm to Isaac, which there's a different word for, or he was molesting him. The Bible uses a lot of euphemisms to uncover someone's nakedness. It means to have sex with them. 9 out of 10 times in the Bible. And I say that because there's that 10th time that we're not real sure about, but it makes sense as well, and I'll go ahead and tell you, because we didn't get to talk about it last week. When the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and the ground was dry and everything was going back to normal, Noah got drunk. And one of his sons came in, and the Bible says he uncovered his father's nakedness. And then when Noah woke up, he placed a curse on his son. There are some who try to explain that away and say he was just disrespectful. Those are the same people who will say that Sodom and Gomorrah was only about hospitality. I don't get a curse being because you accidentally saw, Lord, I have to tell you, if somebody was going to, maybe I am cursed, maybe this is why I'm having all these things, but if somebody got punished for seeing naked people, one of the things that they don't tell preachers in the seminary is don't be looking when you go in the room, even when in the hospital, even when somebody says, come in, because they might not be ready. And then there's the other situation that George probably knows, that without warning, they'll say, you want to see what they did? No, I don't want to see it. Oh, Lord, no, I don't want to see it. Oh, brother. So, I just don't think seeing somebody's nakedness is that big of a deal in terms of the punishment kind, especially when it's accidental. But this is a different thing. So the Bible uses a lot of euphemisms to not to make it less egregious than it is, but in order to maybe soften the blow for the reader, who, remember Jesus said, let the reader understand. That's why Bible study is so important. So you have to make sure that you're not just reading. You've got to dig deeper to understand what it is you're reading, because anybody who has ever tried to teach a Sunday school lesson, or who's ever tried to do some self-study, knows that you can read the same passage twice and find something new both times, if you go in it in a sense of prayer and I want to learn. Another indication is verse 11. This matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. The Hebrew definition for the word in English that is distressed is, this thing was very, very bad in his sight. Distressed and very, very bad, two different things. So God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. This is why Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all considered Abrahamic faiths, because Abraham is the literal father of all three. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Now, here's a question that I don't really have the answer to, but I also think it makes for problems. How do you explain Abraham's behavior? Abraham, at this point, is considered to be one of the richest people in the area. He is a very wealthy man, and yet he gave them a skin of water and some food. His wife / lover and his son, and it wasn't much, because it says he set the stuff on her shoulders. Now, Abraham's well over 100 at this point. Hagar's getting on up there in years. Ishmael was a teenage boy. Why didn't he strap it on him? Why didn't he give him a donkey or something? But went on their way and wandered in the desert. When the water skin watering the skin was gone, she put the boy under the bushes, and then she went off and sat down far away, a bow shot away. Once again, you feel sorry for Ishmael if indeed he did not molest him. If he did, then he gets what he deserves. But here's his own mother. I mean, maybe you can explain away Abraham's behavior, but here's his own mother. I mean, you got to think, why did his own mother not just do what other mothers would probably do instead of letting them go off and die somewhere by themselves? Just hold on to him until the very end. One commentator said that this is such a strongly felt incident that it trickles into modern Islam with how men treat women. That there is an ancient resentment for the way Hagar treated Ishmael. Now again, that's a commentator, it's not necessarily the truth, but it kind of makes some sense and is helpful to our understanding, I think. It certainly is confounding, if nothing else. Why in the world would she do this? And let's go back. Let's see. I cannot watch the boy die. And she sat down and she began to cry. God heard the boy crying. The angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, and I will make him into a great nation." Now, this is an interesting thing. If you think about what God had told Abraham, which we'll have to go back to next week. He told you, "I will make you the father of a great nation," or literally the father of many, because you got to count all that. But he told Abraham that as far as he could see would be his. He had land. He tells Hagar that her son will be the father of a great nation, but he guarantees them no land. Now, go back and think about what it means to be a wild ass. You're superior to everybody else. You are unreasonable, uncontrollable, stubborn, headstrong, and you think you're entitled. You're a great nation. Your great nation literally means race of people, group of people. But you don't have land. But now if you have that attitude that you're better than everybody else and deserve it, and you're unreasonable and headstrong, it's a very interesting combination. It might lend one to maybe take what's not theirs. And so basically there's the rest. And God opened her eyes. She saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water. She gave it to the boy to drink. And then we skip. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Haran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. So we won't go any further than that, but he was a desert dweller, and that whole area is where what we would consider Arabia. The Ishmaelites, there are 12 sons that were born to him, just like 12 to Isaac. But the Ishmaelites are the ancestors of the modern-day Arabs. Desert dwellers, I mean, you know, you got to be a desert dweller if you live over there. So it's a very, very interesting story, very, very interesting situation. Oh, I meant to add one other thing. When it said that he was playing with him, in the Syriac Peshitta version of the Bible, which is essentially an Aramaic version of the Bible, the word there is used, the word for playing with him actually is translated as conjugal caresses. See, this is one of those things that's sort of been hidden in plain sight. You know, you got that going on, you will have animosity. I mean, and then you take the family animosity of the mothers and all of that. St. Paul, actually discussed this in Galatians chapter 4, 20, chapter 4, 28 and 29. Paul brings this up. Galatians 4. He says, "Now you, brothers, like Isaac, are children of the promise. But just as at that time he who was born according to the flesh," that would be Ishmael, "persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now." And so this word in Greek means to systematically do harm to. So there's some harm done with intentionality and over the course of time. It's not the same word, but it's not, they weren't playing tiddlywinks. We know that. And children of the promise. Who is Paul talking to? This gets us into a lot of stuff and brings us to what Chris was talking about. And this will be the last thing that I say. As you look, I think I put something in. Let me see. Let me make sure. Didn't I put something in your stuff about covenants tonight? Yeah. Oh, good. All right. So the Lord has dealt with his people from the very beginning through covenantal relationships. We talked a little bit about that circumcision of Isaac when he was 8 days old. Abraham circumcised himself. Once again, I don't even want to think about that. But circumcision was a sign of the covenant, a sign that you were in a relationship with God. We'll talk a little bit more about this next week, but circumcision of the flesh gave way to circumcision of the heart in the New Testament. Literally the cutting away. But the New Testament version of circumcision is baptism. On the 8th day, Jesus was presented in the temple by Mary and Joseph. And if you'll remember, that day also is the day that Simeon held Jesus and said, "Now let your servant depart in peace, because my eyes have seen your salvation." And he goes on, and the reason he's called a prophet, he said, he basically is the Savior of the Jews and the Gentiles. And so this is, this is awesome. He also makes a prophecy about Mary as well. But so there's covenants. There's the one from Adam. There's the one from Noah. There's the one from Abraham. Then there's one from Moses. There's one from David. And then there's the New Covenant or the New Testament. The covenant of grace is the covenant that has overarched them all since Genesis 3:15. That God could have destroyed us because of the breaking of the Adamic covenant, but He has provided grace through either the promise of a Savior to come or the Savior who has come. So if anybody asks you, how can it be said that Abraham went to heaven when he didn't believe in Jesus? No, Jesus was far off, but he believed in the Jesus yet to be. He believed in the Messiah yet to come. He believed in the promise. That's how people in the Old Testament were saved. This is why God's heart broke so many times, because the people of Israel were so stubborn and hard-headed, and they had people like Jeremiah and Hosea and Isaiah and Zechariah and all those people who were calling them to believe and who were constantly putting out there's this Messiah coming. And they rejected. Now, the people of the New Covenant, God's new people, are all those people who, by faith, are grafted in to covenant Israel. So it's a grafting into the tree. Anybody who believes in Christ. So it is no longer ethnocentric. It's better to say that it's ethic-centric. It's based on your belief and your behavior, not on your nationality anymore. And so there's two ways to look at the donkey that Jesus procured and rode into. To stand on and to sit on something is to show authority over. So one way to look at it could be, obviously this is just another way of Jesus, if the donkey indeed represents Ishmael and Islam, which was still 300, 400 years out by that time. But if it does, the one way to look at it is Jesus is simply superior. There is no other God. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father. The other way, as you say, to say he's tamed the wild donkey. I'm coming. I know I'm coming. I got one sentence. Hold on. To tame the wild donkey applies just as much to Westerners as it does to Middle Easterners or Easterners, Oriental Easterners. And that just simply means that Christ can tame and take away any sin and make any wild ass of a man or wild ass of a woman a tame one. I love saying that. I can call that a lot, but not in the biblical sense. Yeah, that one too. That's right. And smart. So it means that Jesus can take us and by grace through faith, He tames the wild sinfulness in our nature and makes us, again, watch what Paul says. See how it's titled? New creations. The old has died and the new has come. So it's and thank you for bringing that up, and I'm glad I didn't forget it, because I love the way the whole story, overarching story of the Bible, just ties in and fits together. And the more you study, the more you understand, and the more you see, that really is why that is. This fits there and this fits there. The good news is that there is hope for the Jews and there's hope for the Muslims. We know there are the biblical, ancient reasons for the conflict that have lived on for 3,800 years or better. But we also know that because of their disbelief or their wrong belief, neither of them are guaranteed anything but separation from God. But they are promised that if they turn to Christ, they will be saved. And so, right now, it's really, for me, easy to take sides in this war that's going on, because it looks like, it's just unthinkable. I don't even want to see the pictures that exist. And they're out there, and they're floating all over social media. Thankfully, they will be blurred and say, if you want to see this, it's very graphic, click. I don't want to click. I just move on. But people who are so evil that they will do this kind of thing to babies and children, and this kind, for me, the taking of the side in this, it is a moral issue, I think, but at the same time, we're called to pray for both sides, because they're both lost without Jesus. And it is we always have to be on the side of right, but right doesn't always mean saved. You know what I mean? There is a difference, and I hope that we don't get confused by that. So you can be on the side of right and still pray for that person that they be saved, or that nation, or whatever. Still understand that they're lost as lost can be. Mohandas Gandhi was more often than not on the side of right, and he did a lot of good, but he was lost. And so, we have to remember that even though this war seems to be fairly clear, and certainly, in the moral sense of the thing, we want to pray that it ends soon. We also want to pray that before one more of them, whichever side, dies, that because with every one that dies without Christ, there is no second chance. There is nothing beyond the cessation of this life in terms of another chance, an opportunity. If that opportunity is not taken now, it's gone. And so that's what breaks my heart. Anytime there's a war, when these people die, they die apart from Jesus. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I got to go before I get a spanking.
It may be too late.
Maybe too late.